What is the meaning of Heaven's Gate? According to the website, it means that Applewhite and Nettles are the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Income from the group's new computer consulting business, called Higher Source, enables them to rent this 9,000 square foot residence in an affluent neighborhood near San Diego. But former member Rio D'Angelo says the group's main focus was their impending suicide.
We felt really good, and now we had to prepare. So we knew that the exit was, at that time, imminent.
Applewhite says he is waiting for a sign from the next level, which will tell him when it is time for the group to leave the planet. Until then, his followers make preparations. They check their supply of phenobarbital, a powerful barbiturate, which can cause death when combined with alcohol. They purchased it in Mexico months earlier. They work out a suicide schedule, and they create uniforms.
We all had uniforms made for us, and we went out and got Nike sneakers on sale for $10.
D'Angelo designs the Heaven's Gate away team arm patches.
We were considered an away team, like from a spacecraft, like in Star Trek. The away team goes down to the planet, does what they have to do, and then they come back up.
December 1996. The newly discovered Hale-Bopp comet moves closer to the Earth. Applewhite announces to his followers that this is the sign he has been waiting for. He says the spaceships will soon be arriving to take them home to the level above human.
The reason that the comet was the indicator was that it was something that you could see anywhere in the world, and he felt that the next level would give him a sign in that way.
But shortly after Applewhite's declaration, D'Angelo starts having doubts.
I felt like there was something more that I needed to do. And it was confusing to me because I love Doe and I love the group.
With Applewhite's blessing, D'Angelo decides to leave. March 19th, 1997. In the backyard of their home, Heaven's Gate members videotape one another, issuing farewell messages to the world.
This is the happiest day of my life. I mean, I've been looking for this for so long.
Ma'am, should I share the other video also?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Not this one, sorry.
Okay.
Not this one. There will be another one called, I think that's the war veteran.
Yes, ma'am. Unemployed veterans and suicide.
That's right, yeah.
And maybe what some of those...
Inside a classroom near Beetler Armory today, a group of mostly Ohio National Guardsmen learned how to better diagnose their fellow soldiers who may be on the brink of killing themselves.
Historically, the suicide rate in the military and the Army, I'll speak for the Army, has been lower than the national average. But about 2 years ago, we started to go above the national average.
The suicide rate in the general public is about 11 people per 100,000, but among veterans, it's 20 per 100,000. The reasons? It seems veterans, reserve guard, and active military have come into a perfect storm of stress. There are multiple deployments, which is hard on relationships. A bad economy has hit everyone, but unemployment among vets is twice the general population.
There really is, some concern out there for employers where, they have to deal with maybe a soldier deploying, and how does that affect their company? And sometimes it makes our soldiers less marketable.
While support for the military is higher than past conflicts, a returning soldier can be hard on themselves.
A soldier returning from deployment, it's not like, hey, you returned and now your mission's done. Our nation is still at war. And as a result, what that means is that it raises the stress level for a soldier even once they return. They don't come home and take their uniform off and say, well done. Really, what they say is, all right, what's next?
Add all of that together, and that's why there's training like this. Soldiers trying to help soldiers avoid dying by their own hands. In Columbus, I'm Mike Bowersock, NBC4. Other
And maybe what some of those.
inside a classroom near.
Okay, so you could, Chanel, you could share the last class, the slide that we were using in the last class. Maybe it'll be in the last couple of slides, the ones on suicide. Okay, so can we quickly talk about what you saw in the, well, now we have seen 3. One was on cyberbullying. The second one you saw was on a cult, and the third one on veterans and suicides. So could you quickly tell me, some of you? Was it clear at all, the videos? Did they make sense?
Like we have to tell what was suicides according to the videos.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Kuldeep. You have to be a little louder. Yes, Kuldeep, you were saying something.
Can you like tell what exactly we have to tell?
I'm asking you that you saw the videos. What do you make? What do you make of the videos? What are they about?
If I can speak.
Yes, Jahnavi.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, the videos were mostly about the different situations or the different ways in which people suicide, like basic 3 ways. Firstly, it was like mental disturbance or like immediate shock kind of thing. Secondly, it was like brainwash and planned kind of thing. And third one was stress and mental disturbance over a long period of time.
Okay, yeah. So you can identify certain certain elements which you think are possibly the causes why why the suicide happened. So these are, I mean, I've presented them as examples to go through or connect them to Durkheim's understanding of suicide. Now, I think we discussed in the last class that what Durkheim was trying to do in his analysis of suicide rates was that he was trying to develop a theory of suicide. And for him, what was important was to think about what is it, this kind of relationship between cause and effect. So if suicide is what has happened, is what you're studying, what is it that has caused it? And so what he does is, when he looks at this data across Europe, he's trying to focus on the structure of suicide rates and how the structure of suicide rates is really a positive function of the structure of a group or a class of people's social relationships. So what we are seeing is, what is the connection between suicide rates and the structure of the group, or suicide rates and the structure of people's social relationships. And the second thing is, he was trying to, the second principle that we find in his work is that social relationships vary according to the level of integration and regulation. So these two aspects, integration and regulation, what he was focusing on. So now, if you think of integration, how well one is integrated to a group, there are 2 ideas that I think come in. One is the number of ties, like how many connections do you have, and the density of ties. right? How close or how dense your connections are. So, so these two aspects, integration and regulation, are the aspects with which Durkheim views the structure of groups or a person's social relationships. Now, based on this integration and regulation, he has a typology of suicides. He talks of 4 different kinds of suicide. Um, so, yeah. So now, when you think that the more one is more integrated to the collective when you have a number of ties and you have very dense ties. So, so the more extensive and the more dense your social relationships are, the more integrated the collective is, the more enmeshed individual group members become in the collective, right? So this is what he understands by integration. Now, when you think about excessive integration, what will happen? When you are very well integrated with, when integration is high, then people are less likely to commit suicide, right? But he's also saying that when it's too strong, then you have the possibility of what is called altruistic suicide. So in a sense, if you look at that example, which of the examples do you think would represent altruistic suicide? The ones from the videos that you saw.
The second with
which one was that? Which one was that?
And the second in which gods,
Cult one.
where people wanted to go to heaven.
Cult one is altruistic, where integration is very strong, and you actually have a sort of larger perspective, and you think you're doing it in the cause, in the name of a greater good, with ideas of a greater good. So now the other extreme of that is when integration is very low, right? When you're not integrated with the larger unit. Did we do any can you give any example of that?
The first one in which the gay student was isolated.
Right. When the individual is not very well integrated, the integration is very low with the larger unit, that is egoistic suicide. So you have altruistic and egoistic, where we look at integration and the person's and the collective's number and density of ties in order to understand the bond that unites individuals and attaches them to life. So in cases of altruistic suicide, that bond is very strong, and yet there is that possibility of suicide. In case of egoistic, that bond is very weak. You're not integrated at all, and that can result in feelings of isolation, feelings of a lack of collective belonging, which can then lead to suicide. So. Yeah, so this is so far as integration is concerned. The other concept that he related suicide to is regulation. And by regulation, as I said before, we mean the sort of really the moral regulation, right? To what extent do values and norms, how do they define who you are in a group? Now, for regulation, Durkheim talks about, again, 2 kinds of suicide: anomic and fatalistic. So, and do you think any of those examples suggest either anomic or fatalistic?
I guess the army one might be anomic suicide.
Yeah, right. So that you no longer have the kind of regulative powers that you were used to. So, you have made a shift from one kind of society to another, and there is a kind of void. There is a kind of moral void. You are no longer regulated in the same way. So that disruption is a kind of creates a situation of anomie, and it can lead to suicide. So when you think of when you think of the social bonds, what Durkheim is really saying is that these social bonds are also moral bonds, that they give us. The social bonds will have integrative features, for instance, intimacy, connection, and so on. But they also have regulative features, such as moral obligations and expectations. So when you have situations of deregulation, that can lead to suicide. And what are situations of deregulation? First, when norms are constantly changing, or when there is a breakdown in moral clarity. So in case of the war veterans, here use an example of a breakdown of moral clarity, that you don't know that the moral order that you were used to earlier is no longer there. Um, so people's ability to then identify purpose is to then think about purpose, the purpose of their lives then becomes problematic, and this creates a situation of crisis. Regulation could also be weakened by a change of status in the individual or by a collective crisis. So you could, so for instance, the pandemic is a collective crisis which has weakened regulation in some senses. So that and this creates a global recession or a pandemic. These are collective crises, but it could also be weakened again in the case of the war veteran by a change of status in the individual. So from again another example could be retirement, that you have the workplace, you have certain norms, and then you when you retire, you don't have all of that anymore, and suddenly there is a kind of change in the status. So what we are saying then is that a shared sense of or a sense of shared moral clarity um, acts as an independent force which protects members of a society, which again allows members of a society to be connected to each other to make that social bond possible. So now when like integration, too much regulation will cause fatalistic suicide, because people feel like they're not in control of their lives. There is great oppression and so on. So if you think again of a prison situation where or the camps during in Hitler's regime. This is something that could, where regulation is excessive, where there's complete oppression and there's very little space left for humans to express agency. So yeah, so that you're subjected to farmer suicide. What do you think it can be? Yeah, fatalistic. It could be fatalistic. Could it be anomic too?
Yes, ma'am.
In what way?
No, ma'am.
It could be anomic, right? How do you think farmer suicide could classify as anomic suicide?
Well, it could not be anomic, right? They are not. Farmers are never regulated. They still feel oppressed because of certain changes.
Like ma'am, overworked school students.
Sorry, I didn't get who last person. What did you say?
Overworked school students.
Overworked school students will be an example of what?
Fatalistic suicide, maybe.
Okay, you feel oppressed, yeah, and not in control of your lives. That's possible. But I'm trying to think again of so anemic suicide, where your sudden disruption may affect crop prices, leading to suicide. That's what. So I think that it could also be anemic suicide, isn't it? Farmer's suicide.
Anomic suicide could also be because of weather. Like the weather could destroy the crops and all.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, is the regulative powers of society not a necessary condition for anomic suicide?
Regulated?
Disruption in the regulative powers of society, or is it anomic suicide? So suicide is something that is caused when there is any disruption.
So when because of a disruption, see here we are not. I think we are not. If you think of sort of external physical changes in the environment, if I think of things like changes in weather, or drought, let's say drought, or too much rainfall, or things like that, which have caused suicide. So the connection there is not to that physical event, to the natural occurrence, but it is to the kind of to how that affects the social. So if I say there is an earthquake, how has that affected the social? So the pandemic, over which the virus, we don't have control over that, but how has that affected social order? What is the change in social order? What is the disruption that has happened in the level of integration and regulation? That is what we are interested in. So we are interested in the relationships, the social relationships between groups of people. And the root cause of that change may be something else, may lie somewhere else. But what we are focusing on, well, what Durkheim was focusing on in order to explain suicide was these social changes. So you could say that conditions of drought have actually disrupted the social relations, the social of the individuals, and the social here, I could think of things like, individuals' agency, the way in which, the control of their, to what extent they feel in charge of their lives, all of that comes under, is threatened. So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I understand.
So we may feel that the root cause lies elsewhere. So the root cause, let's say in the context of the pandemic, and I think you may be aware that even in the context of the pandemic, there were several suicides. I remember early on, there was a case where, I think there was a man who jumped off from one of the floors of AIIMS because, after he was found to be COVID positive, or maybe he was not even found to be COVID positive, he was just being tested. So I think if you think of what happens there, is it the virus, is it the pandemic, or is it because of the kind of disruption that has happened in the regulative powers of society? So the way in which it is, the group is, or the collective is able to create a sense of a moral world, create a sense of a social world, that function itself comes under stress. And that may be because of something else. It may be because of a pandemic. It may be because of global recession. It may be because of for the farmers for a drought. It may be because of sudden changes in policy, which is what we are seeing with with the current situation with the farmers' protests. Um, so yeah, and yeah, so we have then these two aspects of with regard to these two kinds of suicide with regard to the regulative powers of society, when regulation is excessive and when regulation is too limited. So this is there any other slide in this, Shannon?
Ma'am, can you just explain a bit about regulation? I didn't get that point.
Okay. So can I ask you anybody else, can I ask you what you mean, what we understand by regulation?
In my knowledge, it is a law and order to be maintained, like.
Okay. And when I say, so what we are saying when we say moral.
Regulation.
Yes.
Regulation also, as you were trying to explain probably, that what I understood was that regulation might also be a condition in which we feel hopeless, like we might not be able to really change a lot of things because of any means. Like even government imposes some laws, then also we can't change a lot of things. But in the case of farmers, if weather suddenly gets disrupted or gets very bad, then they feel that they can't do a lot in that case.
Yeah. So you see in this slide here, you can say that regulation refers to the degree of external control on people's lives. So when I think of the term social structure is it's difficult to identify, but if you think about it, the kind of stable arrangements that holds us together, that holds our social relationship, that enables us to conduct our lives in particular ways. So regulation is that degree of control that is exerted on our lives, and you could think of it in terms of the laws, the norms, all of them in fact frame for us a moral order, a fabric within which we operate. When that is disrupted, and so if you remember our initial classes, and I was talking about how sociology emerged in the context of the Industrial Revolution, and I said one of the things that the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution and all of this actually brought on is that there was a need to create a new moral order, because there is a shift. You believed in religion as sort of the starting point and the major explanation for everything that was happening, and there's a shift from that to rational thinking, to reason. And once we've shifted to reason, we then need to create this other moral world, create these other sort of signposts for regulation, for this kind of structural, for this kind of scaffolding or this kind of fabric that needs to be created. Yes, Danisi?
Ma'am, so I had one doubt that can we classify a act of suicide under two categories? Because even in this farmer's example, they won't be committing suicide the very season they face any kind of disruption in a regular usual crop pattern. It would be like that they'll get indebted and this cycle will go on, and eventually after 2-3 years when they finally give up that they won't be able to come out of this, and they lose all hope, and then they commit suicide. So at that moment of time it might be that regulative powers might not be as unstable as they were 2-3 years back, but the root cause lies in that one drought or that one policy change decision which kind of started this whole cycle. So what should we be considering?
So you're saying it should be
fatalistic, like I felt it it might be fatalistic, but even this makes sense that it can be anomic as well.
Yeah. So I think, and again, you see that we have these 4 types of suicide on the basis of these two, what we call these 2 social facts, integration and regulation. But we know that integration and regulation also cannot be seen in isolation from each other. So perhaps, I mean, and I think this is this could be seen as one of the critiques to Durkheim's sort of classification, because there is a great deal of there is some overlap on with regard to how these social facts will be connected in a particular case of looking at suicide. Now, we must remember that what Durkheim was trying to do was look at again large-scale data and try and think about certain general patterns. Now, if one, and this is again, if one takes, how are we to evaluate this work? We have to evaluate it in the context of the kind of data that was there, and the fact that it was, European society at a certain period in time. So while when we try and look at that in the context, let's say, of contemporary India, we do find that certain things are very useful. It's useful to think of it as a social fact. It's useful to think of these ideas of integration and regulation. But these ideas may play out very differently in the case of contemporary India, in the case of the farmer suicide. So one sort of lesson, I think, from this is that many of these ideas and concepts need to be seen as what are called ideal types. Ideal types in the sense that they are sort of certain typical characteristics of phenomena which you put out there, but you can use what these typical characteristics are as heuristic devices, as devices for us to understand the contemporary. So you see, we are able to have a conversation, able to have a dialogue on the nature of farmer suicide based on these concepts, integration, regulation, the different types, and so on. To think that it should neatly fit in with only one type is, I think, problematic. And possibly that's the kind of critique that we can make of Durkheim's work, that when you begin to look at integration and regulation, it's possible to see that there are types that certain kinds of suicide will not neatly fit into any one category. Does that make the categories irrelevant? No, they don't. You do see that there could be patterns, but we can also use those categories to then, to then understand other kinds of contexts, and suicide in other kinds of contexts. So to then say that it could be both, it could be fatalistic, but it could also be anomic, where you're then actually then questioning or pointing to the kind of moral order, the kind of rules and regulations around the context of farmers. But I think what's also important is to see how farmers' suicide becomes a category itself. So, you have, in sociology, there's a lot of writing on, there is some writing on the classification of, or the emergence of this term itself, farmer suicide, right? We don't have a term like student suicide, even though there are several students who commit suicide, right? We don't have a term like Dalit suicides, so what we are saying then is that for us to look at farmer suicide also, we have to see that this is something that data has been collected on, it has been put together, and a term has been given, a term has been created for us to then immediately understand what is going on. So if I were to use Durkheim to look at farmer suicide, I could use Durkheim to think about integration, regulation, and the 4 different kinds of suicide. But I also must understand the creation of the term itself, and what kind of data and what is the history of the creation of this term. Why this term, and why do we not have similar terms for other kinds of suicide? Maybe with the same kind of numbers. I don't know the numbers. I mean, it'll be interesting to compare, that over the last 10 years, what are the rates of suicides of farmers, and what are the rates of suicides of students, and what are the rates of suicides of Dalits. And that will help us to then build a critique of the very term itself, that, that we have created this term, but we don't have sort of similar terms for other kinds of suicide, which may have occurred in similar numbers, which may have similar numbers. All right. So do you have any more questions? So we will move to Chanel. I'm going to request you to share the other PPT that I have sent. It's on interpretivism. Yeah. So we talked about positivism as one of the main approaches in doing sociology, in the method of sociology, in the theoretical ideas and concepts of sociology. We gave some examples of that through in our discussion on positivism. The second sort of approach that we are going to deal with, and you will see that it's very different from the positivist approach, is the interpretivist approach, what we call interpretive social science, largely traced to the work of the German sociologist Max Weber, and there's also the philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey. Now, Dilthey actually speaks of 2 kinds of sciences, that which is based on the natural, on the Naturwissenschaft, and Geistwissenschaft. That which is located in nature is rooted in abstract explanation, so that you're really trying to arrive at these abstract explanations, whereas the social sciences, it's rooted in empathic understanding. So empathy comes into focus, and we've been discussing empathy a lot in our tutorial classes as well. So Weber's contribution is in this term Verstehen, which really means understanding, and understanding in the context of people's everyday settings and everyday lives within specific historical settings. Now, again, you see there is a return to the idea of the relationship between the private and the public, relationship between personal biography and history. So we want to, when you think of interpretive social science, what we are focusing on is Verstehen, is the understanding of people's everyday experiences within specific historical settings, of people's biographies, of looking at the personal in connection to the social, in connection to the historical. So the purpose of sociology then is to understand and study purposeful social action. And that is the objective of interpretive sociology. So now, what is purposeful social action? First of all, action that is subjectively related to the behavior of others. So that what I'm interested in is really behavior in which there is another that is involved. And I think there is, almost everything that we do this aspect is there. This fact that it even things that I do in complete isolation from others is in some way or the other often related to the behavior of others. And here if you think of the purposeful social action, a very common example in sociology is the difference between the wink and the blink, right? So that when I blink, that's not generally that's not purposeful social action unless I'm doing it as purposeful social action to catch your eye or something. But if I look at the wink, that is purposeful social action. So it's directed at somebody. It's it's trying to communicate. So the blink, which is the blinking, which is the reflexive action, is something that is that we are not interested in. That is not the primary object of interpretive sociology. Next slide, please. So we will, ask the same questions that we did of positivist social science, things like, what is its connection to agency? What do we believe human reality? What do we believe social reality to be? We'll ask similar questions, and you'll see that they have very different answers when you take an interpretive approach. Now, the first point I have on this slide here is that interpretive social science is related to hermeneutics. Now, hermeneutics is it's basically figuring out the meaning behind words. So it starts with, and it's a method of reading religious texts. Now, you know that religious texts. In religious texts or in any text that you read, there is always a meaning that is hidden. So you may have certain words written, but behind that you have another kind of layer of meaning which is hidden, which must come to the forefront. So the reading of religious texts use this method of hermeneutics, which means to unravel the meanings of what is written. So if drawing on, for instance, the Bible, you have stories in the Bible, but those stories in the Bible again take you to certain kinds of moral positions. Let's say then let's say you can understand hermeneutics also by thinking about poetry. Now, when you read a poem, you know that, and I think all of us you must have done this in school as well, where you were trying to interpret what the author is saying, what the poet is trying to communicate. So the poet may be describing nature, but through that description of nature is trying to communicate something else, right? So this process of meaning making, of trying to find that which is hidden and make that visible, that is hermeneutics. In this, what we do is we go through a very close reading of a text to unravel those deeper, richer meanings which are embedded in the text, but that is not apparent. And I'll give you, towards the end of our discussion on ISS, or we could also do it in the tutorial, I suppose, we will talk about what do we mean by meaning being embedded in the text, and getting to that. And the text could be conversation, it could be written words or images. I think images you're more familiar with. When we did that whole exercise of seeing that video, Berger's Ways of Seeing, you saw that you have a certain image, but you know that there is a story behind that image, and how that story is actually very layered. So sometimes if you see the big picture, you may not see what's happening, what is exactly happening in that particular image. It's only when you zoom in that you ask certain questions of that image, and and then create this sort of deeper, richer context. The other issue is when you look at a conversation, written word or images, is about how parts relate to the whole, and this is part of our method of hermeneutics, part of our method of meaning making, is to see how parts relate to the whole, is to connect the immediate to a larger historical setting and context, is to make that connection between the personal and the personal biography and history. So broadly, when we think of interpretive social science, interpretation and meaning making. These are our the key ways in which we do interpretive social science, the key ways in which we can understand what interpretive social science is. There are several varieties of interpretive social science, and as we go along in sociology, there are all these different theories which draw from this basic idea of Verstehen, draw from this basic idea that it's possible to interpret, that there is always something that is hidden, there is always something that is behind what we see or what we hear or what we are reading. Okay, next slide, please. So you see that some of these, social constructionism, ethnometrology, these are some of the theoretical orientations within interpretive social science. I'll take a few minutes to talk about ethnometrology, but before I do that, Chanel, would you play that last video?
Ma'am, just the one doubt I have. Ma'am, are
Sure.
we going to discuss the hermeneutics and whatever key terms that we had described in the in the afterwards? Because I'm bit confused about what exactly these keywords play role in understanding the sociology.
Yeah, we'll go through let's go through interpretivism, and then if you still haven't understood, then we'll come back to it.
Okay, ma'am.
All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. Really excited that all you guys are here. We've got a really exciting mission that we're going to be doing today. We're going to be freezing in place on cue at the exact second. We're going to hold that for 5 minutes, and then we're going to unfreeze, and we're out.
They stopped what they were doing and just stood like frozen.
How long has this been happening?
I don't know.
I just walked in. Has it been going on for a while?
No, it's just going because this guy just dropped the papers a couple minutes ago. About a minute ago, not even.
It's like everybody.
Yeah.
Can't move my car. There's hundreds of people frozen everywhere. This is wild.
This is so weird.
What's going on?
I don't either.
I think it's some kind of protest problem.
These guys are in acting class.
No, they are not moving. I can't move my car. I need some help. Never mind. They're moving.
That is the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
I thought it was totally me. It was real boy.
All right. What do you think that video was about?
That was an interesting experiment.
Janavi, can't hear you louder. You can also just write in the chat, some of you. But Janavi, go ahead.
That was a really interesting experiment. People were interpreting why the people just froze and thinking about that.
Okay. So others? How do you think it's connected to what we've been talking about? Why do you think I'm showing you this? Is it connected at all? Trying to interpret why they stopped. No, but also, so it's a willful disruption that you've. So you're right, Janvi, that it's an experiment. It's an experiment where you freeze. Now you freeze in a busy train station where you're not supposed to freeze, right? So if I think of the norm or the rule is that you're supposed to go about doing what you're doing. You're not supposed to freeze. So what happens when people freeze? What happens to the others? You see, do they continue to go about doing what they're doing? No, right?
Yes, ma'am. They are stopped, and they was anxiously waiting for the reason why they stopped. And
yeah, so then it's not just the people, like the person who's driving the cart and he's not able to move because there's somebody frozen right in front of him. So it's not just the people who are not able to move, but it's also people around who may be able to move but are not moving because they feel like, okay, what the hell is going on? So what you see there is an experiment of where the social order has been temporarily disrupted, right? Now, when we think about a busy train station, what are the rules of engagement in that busy train station? I think if I look at this experiment of freezing, those rules become very apparent to me. On an everyday basis, if you ask me the rules, I may not be able to tell you what the rules are, right? I may not, because I have imbibed them in a way that it's a part of me. I don't think of it as separate from myself and who I am, right? So it's through this experiment that, and this is what is called an experiment, which is a breach. Through a breaching experiment, I can then understand what the rules and norms of behavior are. So if I were to ask you, what are the rules of the social, of the interaction, and of the nature of your engagement during dinner time in your family, right? Can you tell me what the rules are? Are there any rules? And for each person, it'll be different, right?
Yes, ma'am. Like the seats are already fixed. Like they are not like fixed as in we are to sit on the same table, but we usually go and sit on the same chair we used to sit on.
Okay, so you say stuff fixed. What else?
And then all the people together bring the food from the kitchen to the dining table.
Okay, so people bring food from kitchen to dining table together.
Most of the serving is done by mother because we all are bad at doing that.
Okay, serving is done by mom. What else?
And then own plates are are to be taken by oneself to the sink.
Okay. Use plates to be taken by each person.
And almost all of us tell what happened in the whole day.
What happened in the?
In the day, like what we did, what we studied.
Okay. Okay. So you see that now, is this common to everybody? Now, can I, now one basic thing is, do you eat when you are hungry?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Or do you wait? We don't always eat when you're hungry, right?
Yeah. Eat all together, not all are to be hungry at that same point.
So you may not be, all may not be equally hungry at the time that you're eating, but you eat because it's dinner time, and that's so you, somebody may be more hungry and would have waited a little bit for the others to join, and so in a sense the dinner time is somewhat, you know, whatever, it may be fixed or flexible. And again, that is different in different households. In some households it'll be fixed, in some households it'll be different. But does everybody relate to what Jahnavi just, and I've put it out there, does everybody relate to these rules?
Yes.
Or is there anybody who thinks it's different? Is it different for anybody? No, really, no difference.
Ma'am, some people can be comfortable eating wherever. They might not have the same regulation in the household.
Yeah.
Also, the element of time is also there. I feel like the dinner is supposedly like between 7 to 9 or 10, and if it goes beyond that, I've seen many people get uncomfortable. Like you'll hear responses like it's too late, this is not the right time to eat, and all the obviously unhealthy like notions associated with eating so late. So all of that is can also be seen in the same light, how it doesn't fit into the, you know, the conventional regulation of having dinner at a fixed time.
Yeah, so what we are saying then is that there appears to be that there are certain norms that we all follow, and these are the kinds of things like, you know, you have a dining table, there is, seats are often fixed, you know, help to bring food from the kitchen, you take your own plate back and you put it in the sink, but you say, you know, the serving is always generally done by one person. In most cases it's you know, it's the mom. You know, so, but you know, now we're talking like, you know, if you ask, for instance, if you ask people my age, then this, what you describe as the dinner routine may be very different, right? So when you look at it, for instance, if you look at it from your mom's perspective, again, it may be very different. The kinds of things they may say, maybe they say about the dinner ritual may be very different. So what we are, you know, the reason that we saw that with Chanel, could you please go back to the slides? The reason that we saw that that video on the breaching experiment, and the reason I'm bringing up this example of rules around the everyday. Now, dinner is an everyday part of our it's part of our everyday life, and is that, you know, one of the, and I'll just go back to hermeneutics in a bit, but the next ethnomethodology slide, the next one, yeah. So that one of the sort of theoretical approaches or theoretical or theories around within interpretive social science is ethnomethodology, and it tries to see how social order is achieved. And the understanding is that the question of how social order is achieved is not so easily resolved simply by asking and observing. So when I ask, these are the kinds of responses that I get. But then when I observe, I will see many more things that will come up. I will see that possibly there is one person in the family who never puts his or her plate down, that person's plate is always taken by somebody else. I may see that there are certain people who always sort of hog the conversation, who say more than others. So when you talk of sharing the day, we'll see that, okay, there are some people who are always who talk the most. So in my family, it'll be my daughter who talks the most and the others just listen. So you know that this rule, if I put this as a rule, that we all share what we did in the day, we know that there is a layer to that. There are multiple layers to that. So for ethnometeorology, the question is of how social order is achieved, and the understanding is that we cannot get a full picture of or a full answer to this question merely by asking and observing. What we ask and what is said to us and what we observe, behind all of this, there is another layer of meaning. So the first thing that we are doing is we are saying that we understand that people create and construct social order in their everyday lives by using their common sense knowledge. So what we want to get to is that common sense knowledge. What we want to uncover is how this common sense knowledge, with the use of this knowledge, how have people constructed this social order. So the social order that you see on this busy train station is arrived at through our use of certain kinds of knowledge. We know that we don't, when you walk, you don't bump into people, right? So you know how to avoid. Now, I mean, these are all very, very simple things, but this is the kind of everyday that sociology is really interested in, and that interpretive social science is interested in. So going back to the question of, and I'll come, because before I introduce new concepts, let me just explain hermeneutics again, since some of you may not be very clear. Going back to what hermeneutics is. Now, hermeneutics, as I said, is a method of reading religious texts. It started with the understanding of the primary purpose was the understanding of the Bible, and to say what are the values, or what are the truths and values that are expressed in the Bible. So it comes from the tradition of reading religious texts. But in sociology, we are using that idea that you can interpret the written word. In this case, the written word is from the Bible. You can interpret from that written word, right? So how do you interpret? You interpret with the understanding that whatever you see and whatever you hear or whatever is written is not what is. You can't, it's like, that in the Bible, for instance, the word of God was not explicit and complete. There is always a deeper meaning, a deeper message that is there behind what is said. And that is what we are also focusing on, that there is always a deeper meaning behind this kind of very mundane, everyday stuff. So why is, so for us, when I say dinner table and what are the rules of the dinner table, you're probably thinking like, how does this even matter? And it matters in sociology because it is this mundane that we know has deeper meanings, right? Who eats how much? What is the, how, when do you eat? Do you eat when you're hungry, or do you eat because there is a social time, which is, social notion of time for dinner? What do we say? What is the nature of the conversation? How does it differ across families? Do you think that, this is happening in, let's say, in middle class homes, in upper middle class homes? Do you think this is happening in all kinds of homes? Does class have anything to do with the kind of ritual of dinner time that we are describing. So you see that there are many questions that can come up from something as mundane as what happens at the dinner table. So hermeneutics is then this process or this method of being able to read between the lines, of being able to interpret and understand that there is always something more behind what is being said or behind what we see. And in sociology, that is one of the or when we use interpretivism, that's one of the prime sort of assumptions or understanding that we have of reality. Does that explain hermeneutics? Do you have any more questions before we go forward?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, one thing I understood is it has a link or the connection with the social order, the hermeneutics. But, ma'am, what exactly the role it plays in understanding the society? I didn't get explicitly, ma'am.
Yeah. So, so that what role it plays in, so if I say social order, or if I say society, then how do I look at society? So if I think of positivism, I could say that, okay, I look at events in society as social facts. And I know that I can treat social facts as things, which means that they happen separately outside of my involvement, and I can then see what sorts of patterns are there. You go back to the example of suicide. Now, if I were to look at suicide not simply in terms of certain cause-effect relationships, I know that there will be several other contexts, several other ideas, several other sort of moral implications that I can draw on if I'm using an interpretive approach. So if I use an interpretive approach, then I have to take into account the individual's social construction of reality, their perception of reality. I will look at sort of what people in the immediate context say about the person and the person's context and so on. So it's the idea is that interpretation is a way of understanding, in the case of ethnomethodology, how social order is achieved. Interpretation is a way of understanding how people create their social worlds. So why is it important? It's because when I create my social world, I do it through a process of interpretation, because we are using our common sense knowledge, and then we are constantly interpreting ourselves, we're interpreting others' actions, and that is how we create social order. So how social order is perceived itself is different for positivism and interpretive social science. In positivism, we say that social order or the social world is external to the reality is external to the individual. In interpretivism, the reality is very much a part of who we are, so that it's not external to me. It is what we have connects us. So the classroom experience that you have is about how we connect with each other, how each of us is using our common sense knowledge, our ideas to make this virtual classroom, right? So, I think as you go along, it will become clearer how interpretation or hermeneutics, in this case, again, I'm using them interchangeably. Hermeneutics and interpretation I'm using interchangeably. Hermeneutics is the method of interpreting, is the method of finding meanings in text, word, image, or when I say text, it could be any text. It could be a text that I read, it could be an image, it could be the conversations that I have. So the data that I will get in sociology will be conversations, will be interviews, will be narratives, narrations by different people. And that is my data. And I could look at that as a text. What I observe, a particular scene, that can be a text, because I know that there is something behind it. So if I observe that people sit in a dining table in a particular way, in a particular arrangement, I can make some interpretations. Why does, maybe the oldest member or maybe the youngest member of the family sit at the head of the table, right? Which is the head of the table? Is there a head? So we can interpret certain things about the relationships between people through the placement of people across a table. We can interpret certain things about, so again, if I look at a classroom, and we are not in a classroom right now, but when I think about the classroom, who sits in front and which are the students who prefer to sit at the back? Why do you prefer to sit at the back on a particular day, and on some other days you may sit in front? So the way in which, the fact that, let's say, for instance, you now, I think male students and female students sit together, they're mixed, right? But you had a time when they wouldn't, right? You would have, I remember when I did, when I was in my 11th and 12th, we would sit separately. I mean, nobody told us to, but we sat separately. The girls sat together, boys sat together. So you had the rows of seats, and typically one row or two rows, would be reserved. I mean, the boys would be sitting and the girls would be sitting separately. So now it was a co-educational institution. Nobody told us to sit separately, but yet we did, right? And there would be a few, one or two people who would be sitting together. That was not the norm. So what can we say about the reality of the classroom, or my reality in the classroom, based on what I see? So I may simply say boys and girls sitting separately, or I may interpret it to think about why this happens, right? I may interpret it to say that, okay, there is relative sense of separation of the two genders within the classroom setting, right? There is possibly some animosity between the two genders. So I can, I can interpret it in several ways. And again, this interpretation is not drawn simply from the fact of observing, but it will also be drawn from other points of data, such as interviews and narrations and so on. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So ethnomethodology now, I know that I'm now moving into sort of slightly more complex terms. So you have to stop me if you don't understand. So we don't move too far ahead without, clarity at this stage. So I began with the term interpretive social science, and this I'm using as a broad umbrella term to articulate the approach and methodology, the approach and the methodological orientations and the theoretical ideas, within sociology. One set of methodological and theoretical orientations we discussed through positivism. The second set that I'm talking about is interpretive social science. Now, ethnomethodology is within the larger umbrella of interpretive social science. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? It's almost time, though. So here you see, I want to introduce these two concepts within ethnomethodology: indexicality and reflexivity. Indexicality is that nothing has a fixed meaning, and it's all dependent on context. So you cannot understand anything unless you relate it to the context, right? So it's like, a log of wood which lies outside my house is literally a log of wood. The same, if I have a log of wood lying outside the lecture theatre complex, it could possibly become a hangout place, right, where people sit, have chai, or if that log of wood is there, it's taken to a chai ki tapri, it will mean very different things. So if I look at things or relations or conversations I know it does not have a fixed meaning, and it is dependent on context. So, yeah, the second idea is reflexivity, which is that our knowledge, our common sense knowledge, enables us to find meanings within situations. So that again, what you're constantly doing is that you are constantly interpreting things as we go along. Now, this is something that we don't think about. It almost comes naturally to us, right? So again, these are examples which are examples not from the virtual classroom, but from the real classroom. You know, in a real classroom, if I see that a large, but here I can't see. So in a real classroom, if I see that people are getting sleepy, then I have to change strategy, I have to do something else, I have to do something to wake you up. Now here, what I do is I presume that, I'm being listened to. Since none of your cameras are on, but what I do is I presume that you're hearing me, and I presume there is interest, and the only way I can carry on is with this presumption, right? So somebody else looking at this classroom will have to interpret this sort of meaning. It will have to interpret that this sort of presumption is there on the part of the teacher, in order for the classroom to continue, in order for the classroom experience to continue. So this reflexivity, in this context, this reflexivity is, what is behind this reflexivity is my presumption. So what ethnomethodology does is that it tries to understand this question of how social order is achieved, and one of the ways it's ethnomethodologists will try to understand is through this sort of breaches. Now the breaching experiment was really a way of getting to the idea of the breach, of getting to the idea that you realize some of these rules only when they're disrupted. Now the one of the key theorists of ethnomethodology was this person called Harold Garfinkel, and we will when we do gender also, we will discuss Harold Garfinkel. But right now I just want to say that, okay, it's almost time, but let me take 2 more minutes. Harold Garfinkel, he had done this experiment where he asked his students to go back to their homes and behave as if they did not know that context, to behave as if they were in a hotel and not in their home. And so, and then write notes. And it was, it's fascinating, the first few pages of that book, because what you realize is that when they behaved in that fashion, then the others in the family did not know how to relate to them. So they were all confused. So it's like, somebody would be calling the father sir, and addressing them formally, addressing other family members formally. So they, when it made you realize that social order is actually quite fragile. What you see, and again, if you look at that breaching experiment in the Grand Central Station, that's what it makes you realize, that the order itself is very fragile. It can just change just by a few people stopping and becoming motionless. So you've affected the motion of the entire place just because a few people have stopped. So so social order then is an accomplishment, and otherwise, for us to recognize this fact that social order is an accomplishment is very difficult. We take it for granted. So ethnomethodology has what it does is that it tells us that social order is an accomplishment, and then gives us certain concepts to think about how this order was constructed. How have we created this order? And the idea is that we have actively created this social order. So the social order does not exist outside of us. It is not external to us, and that is seen in that kind of fragility. That becomes very clear in these kinds of breaching experiments. Okay, so I'll stop here. If you have any questions, we can take them for a few minutes, and then we can end the class.
Ma'am, can the tutorials the upcoming tutorials be based on the keywords that we had discussed, the hermeneutics and the second thing, because to have a better understanding?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes, ma'am.
The next tutorial can be on interpretivism, and we'll.
Yes, ma'am.
We will basically, what I'll do is I'll give you some reading. And what category does mass suicide come under? It could come under, I mean, the example of the cult suicide was mass suicide, right? So it could come under both under, it could be altruistic. It depends on the other characteristics of the suicide. Simply mass suicides could come under altruistic, or they could also come under fatalistic. Okay, so I'll see you all in some of you in the tutorial, and for class, and then all of you in for class on Monday.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
See you all.